Hey there, folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Interviews. I'm Arlyeon, and we're here today with Jeffrey Nielson, who some of you may know as Chimeric, the developer behind the space shooter slash roguelite Nova Drift. I mean, that's an accurate description of it, right?
Yeah, and it's becoming more true over time. We've had a lot of requests to kind of increase the amount of roguelike mechanics and variants between every play. Right now, there's a huge amount of replayability through the builds themselves, but I'd like it to be so that you encounter things that are different in every run. And that's not something the game currently has, but I think would go a really long way.
I mean, I've encountered black holes in places where they weren't before, and that was painful.
But one of the
uh,
major updates the game is getting is something called Wild Metamorphosis, which is a mode you would elect after you've unlocked it that would provide you a really crazy grab bag of mods that you can't otherwise rely on. So typically the game upgrade system gives you a lot of tiny mod trees, and you can count on them being there so you can somewhat deterministically create your build. But in this mode, you wouldn't know what you're given every round. So a lot of them are allowed to be really crazy or powerful, or do very strange things like reverse knockback direction, trigger an attack every time you're hit, or mess with the friction of the game. Things I wouldn't dare put in the normal upgrade trees. So it's going to be designed to be pretty wild and unpredictable. Should be really entertaining to stream.
do any of them actually influence the enemies so that their behavior patterns get wonky?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that
Oh
I do
god.
want Wild Metamorphosis to do.
Oh god.
That I think it would just be a nightmare to balance that in any mode where you could predict that. I mean, at that point, it might as well be a toggle, right? But there will be something like the game will give you this enormous benefit if you dare increase the wave speed or your health or take this other interesting rule change as payment for it. And that's what a lot of the wild mods will do.
Yeah, that
So you
sounds
can look at something
terrifying.
built and it's radically different than the build they would normally have done given their starting average. I think it'll really help the social aspect of the game because people suddenly have that moment where they can be like, oh man, it was crazy. This happened to me. I've never seen that before. Which is the best part of roguelikes, and it's something Nova Drift really needs.
Yeah, that part where you recorded that perfect moment, and then like the part after the recording ends where you get smeared. Is that
What's
just
that?
me? There's those perfect moments where you record like going through like a boss fight without getting hit, and then like
Okay.
right after the recording ends, you walk in the next room and just like instantly die like an idiot.
Oh, yeah, everything's harder when you're recording. I feel like it takes up half of my mental faculties just to know that I'm being watched when I'm playing.
I mean, I get more high stressed, and then I sometimes will get like sloppier after the fact. Though inversely, I can also take my time when I'm not being recorded because I'm like, doesn't matter. No one's gonna be getting bored if I'm just sitting here like very casually throwing like mines everywhere or something. It's fine. Oh, right. Also, to the viewers, if you folks are unfamiliar with the general interview style for the Crit Hit interviews, we do tend to kick things off just relatively informally, just to find out more about the devs themselves. So, if you're feeling antsy and want to know more about the skinny of the game itself, there is going to be a list of all the questions we're asking that'll pop up on the screen to enable you just sort of, I guess, fast forwarding through the video. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's actually go towards just a bit about you. And we'll start with pretty light, which is what would be your favorite game or genre?
That's easily action RPG for me. I'm a huge theory crafter. Um, and that's been the driving force between almost every game I play is what can I build. Uh, the big problem I get into with these games is I suffer from restartitis. Are you familiar with this term?
Uh let me actually try. So when I played Dark Souls 3, I made 8 characters to run the first few bosses over and try vastly different builds and ways I could set up the stats and items and armor to find out how these all went, and I think I only finished that game on one character. I'm almost finished on the second one, but like 8 characters. I'm not as bad as my friend who had aesthetic restartitis, where if they didn't have the
Oh, I have that
freckles,
too.
oh god no.
Oh god.
I
So
mm,
it's an advanced case of restart.
it's a
So
very
we suffer
advanced
from the same
case.
affliction. It has to be perfect. Because I'm going to be stuck with it for 100 hours. Of course, that never actually happens because of restarting this. But I think that's important because that is the driving force behind creating Nova Drift, was how do you satisfy this impulse in the most enjoyable way possible without sacrificing that depth. And Nova Drift is basically a thesis saying this is possible and this is how I'm going to try to do it. But yeah, for me, Path of Exile has been my big game ever since 2013, 2014.
I still haven't played it. To be fair,
That's
I've
fine though, because it gets a huge facelift every year and it's always fresh.
yeah.
I would say if you're going to wait till 4.0, you're going to have an amazing time.
Maybe I'll just pull it. Maybe I'll just be like, "Hey, can you show me the ropes so I can like die on stream with you?" I mean, it's always better to die with like an acquaintance or a friend, or at least someone who knows what they're doing.
Sure, I'd love that. And it's gotten much kinder to players. It has this reputation of being vastly, sprawlingly confusing, but they are very careful about how they pace out that information over the first 40 hours. And if you're experienced with it, it actually
Did you
feels
say the
pretty
first
slow.
40?
Yeah, no, this game.
Cripes, it will eat
Oh,
my
most of the
soul.
people who rave about Path they're looking at thousands of hours of playtime. A single character could easily be 100, and I was like, I don't, I love this, but I don't have time for it. So naturally, Nova Drift is how much of a small amount of time can we cram that wonderful experience into?
So, the just the build creation, the sort of you get to have that restartitis in these little bursts
Mm-hmm.
without, and it
And then you
even has the
iterate.
aesthetic adjustments too, because you can pick like a different ship model. You just
Yeah,
can't
I'd like to do
custom.
more of that.
Are you gonna actually have? Because I mean, you've mentioned you have aesthetic restartitis. Are you going to have aesthetic elements that players can like just tweak around with or find in the menu for whatever dumb reason? People want to have like their spinning space rims or whatever, or their different colored fire.
Right, right. Nova Drift Runway. I have I've gone back and forth about that. I was surprised how many people asked for it because right now the way the game works is your color, and if you haven't seen the game, it looks very, I guess I would say Tron. It's very neon,
I mean, there's going to
with
be background
geometric
footage
shapes.
of the game
Oh, sure, okay.
playing while this is going. So, I mean, if you
Um,
haven't seen the game, look at the screen, folks. Stay long and hard. This is the game.
it should be situated somewhere in front of you. Um, so right now, your shield determines your ship's color, and all of the effects match it. But I was impressed how many people asked for that to be a separate toggle, and people wanted other aesthetic ship choices and a lot more mods that change the way you look. And I always thought that was something very cool about Binding of Isaac, where in Risk of Rain you actually see the effects of your character with every upgrade. I would love to do more of that. And Nova Drift, being a very community-driven game, has wound up with a wish list miles long. And as a solo developer, you have to be incredibly careful which of those features you do implement. So it'd be very easy for me to say, like, yes, I'd love to do this amazing aesthetic customization, but it would come at the cost of everything else on the roadmap. And I could do this for a decade and never get through the request sheet. And that's been a really fun and interesting way to develop, but the amount of discipline is crazy. And it's also
So,
why I'm afraid to even promise a roadmap, right? Because every month there's something I convince myself, well, this isn't
you
on the
need
roadmap,
this.
but we come on, we need this. We need to do rift gates where you are taken to another dimension. There's unique modifiers to the enemies. How do you not do that?
It's fine. You'll just end up like Dwarf Fortress, where you're still developing the game like a decade later. It's fine.
If I could, I would love that. if I could manage the stress of doing it, I would think that would be an ideal career. But it's hard. But I do get better at it every year.
We've been talking a bit about gameplays and mechanics, so I'd like to know, just like on a purely mechanical gameplay aspect, is there any title that you found to be particularly inspiring, whether just in general as like a developer for respect for what it pulls off, or for Nova Drift?
hmm Um, I wrote an essay about this recently on the developer blog. Hopefully, we can link that somewhere. Um,
If you give me a
as I
link, I
mentioned
will
before,
toss it in the
awesome.
description.
Path of Exile is absolutely that thing for Nova Drift, which is itself derived from several other amazing innovations. Uh, so, like I said, taking that experience, condensing it down to 20 minutes instead of 100 hours per character. But I'd also like to mention a few other games which do amazing things with very little, relatively. Binding of Isaac is probably the number one for this. The amount of variance between every run is phenomenal. And it's done with a very minimalist design. Uh, Borderlands 2 is very good at this distillation. The skill trees aren't sprawling, but the number of interactions, especially when you consider all the gear available, very good. And FTL. So all enormously variant through no more than is needed to do what it does. Things like that made me wonder how far that could be pushed. Like, can Nova Drift actually come anywhere near the build variance that you see in Path of Exile with its, I don't know how many hundreds of passive skills it has, keystones, skill gems, accessories, gearing choices, crafting. Like, how close to that can we get without overwhelming the player? Like, I still wanted it to be this thing everyone could jump into. So a lot of these smaller games have good lessons on how to do that.
Inversely, are there any game mechanics that you've encountered over your time as like a developer and a gamer that you just as a player or developer tend to avoid?
Yes, I'm kind of a huge elitist when it comes to games. I don't really want to be, but I have to admit that I am. My big thing is I won't play anything that monetizes in a way that undermines the gameplay. So Diablo 3 at launch is a great example of this. They released a game about getting awesome loot drops, except the auction house exists. So nothing better than what you can buy at the auction house drops. So killing monsters isn't exciting because loot isn't exciting. So the core loop breaks. And that's a real shame to me because a huge amount of work was put into those skill systems and it was very well and lovingly crafted. But if you do that, the player can't care about combat to then care about what he can do with that loot. Sorry, that's very cyclical, but
I mean,
does that make
yeah,
sense?
no, I remember a lot of that scandal, and I also remember people just being like, I dropped so much money on the auction house, and I was like, oh dear God, what? So, I mean,
It's kind of a pay not to play at that point.
I, there's very few games in the vein of Diablo that I've played a lot of. I played the original Diablo, and I actually ran through all three difficulty modes. I did Diablo 2 partway through Nightmare, and I did Torchlight 2, which I
Mm-hmm.
dug a lot, and Grim Dawn,
Mm-hmm.
which has like some of that
Yep.
complexity you were mentioning that's there, because like the constellations has been everything else. And like, on one hand, I get the being excited about the loot thing. On the other hand, like, getting set items was the biggest pain in the butt, and I was like, do I have the hours to try and actually pursue one of these? No.
Mm-hmm.
No, I will. I no, just no. And there's such a vast loot table to get from. I was sometimes just like, I cannot justify to myself to spend the time to do that when I'll possibly be replacing
Hmm.
it.
So you felt like, so it sounds like the problem was that the game provided the expectation that you should have or that you needed them instead of just giving you more choices.
It depends. If you're trying to do some of the content in the game, I may have picked a fight with a god, and it did not go well for me.
Mm-hmm.
Being min maxed would really help in taking him on. But to get to the far ends of it would require some really silly drop stuff, and to get things like the set items would require a very large amount of time expended. And it's not like in an MMO where you could go run your raids, etc., and just gradually get things over time. You're always sort of
Mm.
praying for RNGesus, and I
So
hate
which
that.
game specifically was this? Was this Grim Dawn? Oh,
That was Grim Dawn, because that's the one I
okay.
actually put the most time into recently, I think, as a like sort of Diablo like e game.
Mm. That is kind of one of the most difficult parts of balance. Is in theory, the more items there are, the more choices you have, the more power your decisions have. But if something is tyrannically strong, it actually leaves you with less choices than you started to because it starts to feel like the mandatory option.
And the other part of it is the more options you have in general as far as like a loot table goes, when you have a class-based system where most of it will not apply to your character, means all of that extra options that you cannot currently use are just a hindrance and a nuisance. So you're wading through what is effectively a sea of junk, trying to get the one thing you can get that will clinch your ability to like carry through. And I'm just like,
Because you also don't want the game to act like you're the center of the universe and that apply to you. Like I think Diablo actually started doing that. They started making the roles more likely to be the roles that you need.
yeah.
And
There's a few
that's a
games that do
weird
that.
thing. I'm mixed up.
I think it's a neat system. Like, I can get it for having it being somewhat balanced, but like sometimes I could go like I think days of playing and not finding anything that'd be like, and I mean solid days of like 10, 12 hours because I had nothing better to do because like I am a homebody with a disabilities and shiz. What else do I do? So long stretches of hours of finding nothing for your class sucks hard.
Mhm.
Sucks really hard. So I can appreciate when games are like, oh, you're playing this class, I'm going to favor loot drops a bit towards your class. Especially if they
Mm.
have, like, even in multiplayer, if they have separate drops for different players, I don't see why it isn't it's sort of
Yeah,
beneficial to tailor it to the character
Path
at
has
that
been
point.
exploring ways to do that that don't change for each player. So they have different ways to deterministically farm something. And some games have very simple solutions for this, like Borderlands. If
Certain
you want
enemies
to,
drop certain stuff.
yeah. And I could totally understand maybe you don't want your game to do that. And then there's other ways, like Path has something called divination cards, where you collect these cards and you can farm them in specific areas, and they can be turned in for a certain more likelihood of getting. So that's somewhat less lore breaking and a little more universal because each individual player in a multiplayer game isn't given different rules, which adds to the integrity. For a single player game, obviously, it matters a hell of less.
I mean, there's also things just like some games have it where the unique or epic drops that bosses drop are like forging material, which you can then convert into an item of whatever thing. And that actually sort of gets around the whole thing of I keep only getting drops that are never applicable to me because it's a more
Mhm.
generic drop that fits within the game's lore that rewards you. So, I mean, I guess I just hate RNG when it like can give you the middle finger forever because I have
You
terrible
are
luck.
choosing the genre that defines itself on IRNG.
Sometimes, but at the same time, there's plenty of them that have like balances in there.
Mm-hmm.
I can.
I think a good balance is key. Yeah.
I mean, even in like Nova Drift, there are things that you can do that can sort of focus what options come up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Deck manipulation mechanics are what I borrowed there.
And in that
More like what
regards,
you'd see in Magic the Gathering.
that limits like some of the RNG and means that that gets rid of like it's still random, but it is still a random that favors you, as opposed
Mm-hmm.
to it is a random that can literally just give you terrible options always.
Mm-hmm. I definitely
And
get push and pull from both sides of the camp. The people who want it to be far more, who want it to stay as deterministic as it is, and there's people who want it to be far more random. Uh, So I can kind of cater to both people with challenge modes. But
Mm.
there's a point at which if it takes such good care of you that you can always build exactly what you want, then the mod system has no reason not to simply be a skill tree. So there's always that.
I mean, that's entirely fair. It's just like there's a point where when you cannot rely on it whatsoever, I'm just like, ugh. So you're like advancing despite what you have offered rather than with it. But man, this was like not expected for the back and forth here. But okay. So another soft, fluffy question here, but you've mentioned like a few times that you were very busy working on Nova Drift, but have you had any time to dive into gaming of late? And if so, like, what's your poison? And I mean, this
Oh
can
yeah,
be like indie, mainstream stuff, or even like if you do board games or TTRPGs, anything.
sure. That's interesting. I think we're going to talk more about this topic later, but I reached the point I had to start taking breaks. Like if I didn't, it would have been an enormous detriment to the quality of my work. Like rest is important. Um,
I hear
but
that.
we'll talk more about that later, right?
Oh yeah.
My poison lately is Breath of the Wild, which is really unusual for me. I don't normally play AAA games, but this one blows me away. Uh, I feel like Breath could have launched with half of the content and secrets it has, and still easily be Game of the Year. Also, I've been playing it on Master Mode, so it's really challenging and satisfying. But 90% of the time, I'm playing in some indie game. Like I was just playing Into the Breach before that.
Oh heck yes.
That was fun. That was really unique.
Uh, it's I'm not the biggest fan of FTL, but spoilers. I can't recall if I already released the review for Into the Breach, but I freaking loved Into the Breach.
It is
It's
like the master class of minimalism, or like depth through minimalism. I think.
it's genius, and I love like the weird combination of like tactical like battle mixed with like puzzle game because it very
Mhm.
much has that puzzle game part to it that I just love,
Right.
love, love.
I never would have believed that the grid could be as small as it is and allow that much uh, choice. I think it's something like I don't even think it's 8 by 8. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but it's impressively small. So nothing in that game is wasted.
I think it's a little bigger than 8 by 8, but it's not by much if it is.
Let's see.
I see.
I'm really curious now because no, it's 8. It's 8 by 8.
It is literally 8
But
by
it's
8
totally relevant to the discussion, right? Like this is another game that said, I want to do this thing with as little fat as possible. How much can I cut this down without losing anything? No wasted space.
64 gr- grid tiles, of which
Super tight.
wow.
And that's why everything you do matters. Every space you move matters. And if it was any smaller, it wouldn't work.
If it was any bigger, it could be like stalled easier because it keeps
It
everything
start to
nice
feel
and
a bit more like Advance Wars, where it's so big and your movement is so vast that your actions don't have as much weight.
especially because you're like I think the big part that helped it was that you were always needing to be mindful of the buildings
Oh god, yeah.
because it was not just your units at risk, but you also had to be mindful of the buildings and reach an immediate fail state was something that I found very interesting because it made every single one of your actions matter immensely. Because you could
Mm-hmm.
hit someone and get it to stop killing your own guy, but in doing so, you risked having your entire run end right at that moment. And that factor always being there was really neat.
Yeah, playing the objective, not just killing enemies, made it so much better. And there were a lot of times where you catch yourself thinking brute force. Wait. I don't have to beat them. I only have to make this happen. And that leads to really creative problem solving.
Though sometimes my problem solving was can I efficiently murder everyone and level up my guys and actually keep things blocked off?
And that's
Which
awesome.
what was it? The dudes who like self damage on all their actions, who are a nightmare to use.
Oh, I don't have them yet.
They're interesting, but like you need to be like trying to kill like one or two guys whenever they take an action because they are taking damage from their own things. So it's really
That's fun.
tricky.
Yeah.
Now we've gone sort of a bit forward. We've talked a bunch about Nova Drift, but what actually got you into game development in the first place?
I was kind of always doing it before I knew that it was an actual choice that I could make. So when I was a child, I don't know how young I would have been. It would have been about when Super Mario World came out, which what's that, like 1990 something.
I don't know. It's a while.
Um, I was just always drawing entire games on paper. Uh, so I was particularly obsessed with platformers like Sonic. So I would just have pages after pages of levels and worlds drawn, and they would have continuity between the pages, have other pages dedicated to the characters. And as I got older, I started to focus more on technical systems that started to interest me, and stats. And I had no idea this was a job I could have. Like in my head, it was something this mythical other people did. And if you recall, back then, if you were a Sega or a Nintendo kid and you looked at the credits, it was all Japanese names. So it wasn't, there was no reason to believe it was something Americans did. Um, so when my parents told me there was a major for it, it just made sense to me.
Also, when you were talking about like pages upon pages of like game stuff scribbled, I was just like, oh man, I remember doing that for like RPGs, and then also eventually just being like, man, all my art stuff sucks, and I'm done. I eventually went back and dabbled in RPG Maker, but like, did you ever do that?
uh, oh, totally. RPG Maker was. Um, that's what got me between that and Game Maker. And once you're in Game Maker, you start doing real coding and you start making real games. So Game Maker really good for somebody who doesn't have. I'm sorry, RPG Maker awesome for somebody who doesn't have any technical.
I mean, it teaches it.
Right, and it gets you into the less obvious disciplines like storytelling or level design, player choice. These things that really matter beyond the simply creating the code or the art. And if you are a tiny company, those things aren't going to be one person's job. They're going to be little pieces of everybody's job. That's huge. So especially for solo developers, things like RPG Maker are an awesome tool if you're young. Otherwise, I'd say go straight into Game Maker if you aren't so technical that you would jump.
So actually, I mean, this is a pretty good segue point, but like you are by and large a solo studio. You have like a colleague who's helping you with the music and the audio,
Mm-hmm.
but like the rest is you. So
Mm-hmm.
what what sort of skills has like game development and this process required you to put to use? And I mean, you've mentioned how you acquired some of those skills, but did care to elaborate on where you acquired others?
Uh, okay. So my college was focused on artwork. So the jobs that followed were either art or animation, and I did both 2D and 3D and pixel art. Um, so that was covered. My playing with Game Maker in spare time after Game Maker was definitely the biggest contributor to everything else. And it wasn't actually until really late in my career that I realized I didn't love being an artist. It was never the reason. I became an artist because it was a way to make games. And it took an almost embarrassing amount of time to fully convince myself and realize that. Because I noticed I wasn't like the amazing illustrators I had around me. They constantly had a sketchbook. I was always drawing. I didn't go home and want to do that. I went home and wished I was more free to build something myself. Um, I got some really good advice from people that was simply like, look, if you want to do that, just start doing that. There's nothing preventing you. And that is for a kid, especially, or even a young adult, something that's really hard to convince yourself that you can do that, especially as an artist. Programmers in particular, they do, from an artist perspective, seems extremely daunting. It's literally cryptic. It looks like hieroglyphics. And it's very easy to convince yourself subconsciously, if not consciously, that is a skill for other people. And so overcoming that took a really long time. But once I actually convinced myself that I could do it, it was quite easy. You just start doing it, and there's tutorials, and you follow them. So along the way of delving into programming, you play with design, natural side effect of creating games. And if you're anything like me and you have a passion for those systems and world building, it simply comes with practice and out of desire to do it. So I really want to drive that home. My best advice for anybody who wants to get into it is just simply download tools and build something. It doesn't matter what you build, and it doesn't matter if you finish it, just start doing it. So my major, it's also worth mentioning, was really broad. Video game artwork and design major that the Art Institute of Pittsburgh had, which I wouldn't recommend for most people. Had such a broad shotgun approach that as an indie developer, I ended up using all of it. So I was kind of uniquely suited for that. While everybody, my other colleagues who went on to be game specialists, really had wished for a more focused major. A lot of game positions are simply, you are the texture artist or you're the animator. It's a very different beast.
What did lead to your decision to just pursue this particular career path as a solo studio?
That's a big question. The alternative is really hard for me to do now. So again, I've done it all. I've worked for a AAA company. I did a smaller corporation, and I've been a part of a small indie team. And I really want to say that was valuable. I don't think I could even do what I'm trying to do now without having been through all of that. But I also saw barriers to creativity in very different ways at all of those places, and I wanted them to go away. I knew that the only way I could do exactly what I wanted, and what I believed I could do, if I ran the project.
Fair.
Those barriers took so many different forms. It was really a different beast for everything. And I think for the major corporations, that's becoming very obvious as we watch game news, what the limitations are.
Yeah.
And after a certain point, you either accept that, and that means that as a creative, you really don't have much control, or you're miserable. You have to accept it. And that's not true. I'm painting with far too broad a brush here. My experience at AAA's was like that. I know people who have worked for great companies where that's not the case. But it simply seemed everywhere I looked, there was something preventing me. I suspected I could do myself. Just wanted to try.
So, on the subject, though, of doing things yourself, you also have to run your own press, your own advertising. I myself, with like a small group of people who run Crit Hit, have our hands full doing that poorly. How do you handle it as a solo dev, as doing that on your own?
So I do some of that, but mostly that's handled by Miles, who you mentioned earlier, my partner. So Nova Drift is a sole operation, but we do have a publisher, and that's Miles Tillman of Pixel Jam Games, and he's amazing, and we go way back. We've been through an awful lot. He's the co-founder of the small indie game company. So he handles both the game's music and audio, and the game's publishing and marketing. But that said, the smaller your team, the more you do want personal touch and that sort of intimate approach to customer relations, right? So it does end up being quite a lot of my own there. And particularly big for Nova Drift because I did want to design it to be a community-driven game. So there's like a lot of focus on keeping the Discord really active and getting feedback and player suggestions and actually implementing that. Making the meta of the game evolving a very collaborative thing. And that has been insanely challenging with the sheer workload of it. And it is definitely giving me insight on how to do this better moving forward. And it's all I can do right now to sort of mitigate it and make it possible. So I've sort of replaced those problems I discussed at larger companies with, yes, all new ones. Um, However, it is absolutely worth it, and I could not imagine reversing the decision. The one way I can imagine it working is a small team of people like me building something very focused and tight. But so a lot of it is managing mental health again, uh, putting limits on how often you interact with people, such that it's enough that you're present every day, but not enough that you're sort of dooming yourself to constantly slipping deadline. And it's something that you just has to come with practice. And it's taken me 5 years to become fair at it, but it's always a struggle.
I'm going to clarify on that a little bit more in a moment, but there is one last, I guess, the second last detail I wanted to cover here, because we've talked about your colleague a few times in passing now. How did you come to work together? And also, do they provide any input on the game itself, other than, I
That's
guess,
a fun
all
one.
their input for music and audio?
I like that question. That's a fun one. I was working at a medium-sized corporation at the time, and we had this game we would play. I don't remember how we found it. This was back in the days of flash gaming were popular. So you'd go to Newgrounds or one of the other myriad portals like it, and you'd play these cool little games. And they were at the time, as I understood, they were the indie scene. And I don't recall how I found it, but I became in love with this game called Dino, a Pixel Jam game. And it's this game where you're this little pixelated dinosaur in your eyes. And I'd never seen anything like it because it had all of the depth and love that the classic platformers had and quantity of secrets of a game like Super Mario World, but it was free and it was online multiplayer and it had all these little things you just never seen before, even though it was this very almost Commodore 64 NES level graphics. But it had terrain that was any shape. There was no tile base. Hundreds of secrets hidden, maybe not hundreds, but an awful lot. A huge amount of replay value. And my colleagues and I started playing it competitively, racing during our lunch breaks. And something about it just made me think, oh, this is the amount of love in this is just amazing. I wish I could be a part of something like that. And I wound up sending Pixel Jam some fan art of the game that over the years sort of cascaded into me working for them, which still kind of blows me away to this day, especially because it would ripple into me moving to North Carolina, starting a business, meeting my wife. Just a butterfly effect in my entire life from a piece of fan art.
Hmm.
But I ended up becoming great friends with the co-founders of Pixel Jam, Rich Relati and Miles Tillman. And over the years, I realized that Miles' skill set kind of perfectly complemented mine. He handled my blind spots, right? He was a musician. He could make sound effects. And over the years, Pixel Jam slowly evolved from a games producer to a publisher. So it just made a lot of sense. And it was this gradual transition from where I was then to where I am now. And I benefited a huge deal from what they've been through. They had this decade-long experience with the indie scene and all of its evolving permutations from flash games to phone games to cell phone games, sent to iPhone games to uh, Humble, Steam, and now the introduction of all these new stores. I can't even imagine the level of trial it would have been to attempt to do that without the benefit of somebody who had already been through it. So I would definitely encourage anyone who wants to get into indie gaming, especially solo or relatively, to go experience some of this at a bigger company or at least with somebody who's been there first, because it's far too daunting to handle alone. So we say solo, but I have a lot of help.
Fair. Also, I just realized there was a question I still wanted to ask before we get to the big thing of the sort of about you questions, but so what's the origin of your studio's name?
Oh, chimeric. Like chimera, the Greek mythological creature, or if you like the biological term.
Is it like
I
a
love both. Sorry.
no? I was gonna be like, so did you form that studio name before or after Nova Drift? Because it's sort of very applicable to the game itself.
I'm glad you said that. That makes me happy. That's a good question. I think I formed it. I believe it was also a gamer tag before at Nova Drift. Um, but yeah, I could say that it's as simple as I love. I mean, it's as simple as I love both mythology and science. But I would love to be able to claim that it is because it relates to the way I combine the separate game elements or old and new concepts. But yeah, really, I just like the word.
I mean, fair. It's way classier than my old gamer tag, so I was running around as like Firebelly Toad.
Yeah,
Um,
that would be an awkward company name, but I think you could make it work. It would definitely stand out. That's what
uh,
matters most.
I mean, I preferred when I had to make a fictional company in school because I made it Chaos Newts Collective. Yeah,
That's pretty good. I'm gonna be honest with you. I like that.
yeah. Sadly, someone's probably gonna fucking steal that after this gets released, and also I guess I'm already sort of stuck being like crit hit, despite the fact that holy crap, there's so many crit related companies. So I'm just like, I made my
I
grave.
actually I considered that too. I considered critical hit games, but I came to that same conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Things I would go back in time and punch myself to change, but hey. Anyways,
Anyway, I think it's sharp, even if it's in the icon. It's good. You got to think.
yeah. But so now we're coming to the question that I think we've talked a little bit about this on and off because it was just like this thing we were both like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But game development's like super stressful, and that's
Mm-hmm.
especially something that's been honestly in gaming journalism, especially because of certain practices. So, do you have any tips or things you do to help manage that stress? And also, has being immersed in gaming caused you to look into other hobbies to get some distance from, well, gaming?
Sure. That is a big issue for me. I think a person could write an entire book on that topic alone. Um, I feel like it's a lot of little things that you can do that add up to make a big difference. And part of it is just the ritual of doing them puts you in a better mental position and perspective. Um,
Like remembering to eat.
yeah. Before I go into the specifics, I feel like I want to talk about the transition that is becoming that's moving from a creator to a public small company that is so surprising and disruptive. Um, let's see. So you go from this person that's mostly working alone in relative peace to suddenly receiving hundreds of messages per day between all of your different social media platforms.
Oh dear
And
God.
and that's just with thousands of customers, right? The goal for a small operation is closer to tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands if you become as well as something like Risk of Rain. Um, and you have to manage that. And thankfully, I had some experience, again, incredibly valuable work with larger companies first, because then you can witness it and the effects on people, but still have the buffer between you of other people and the distance between you and your customers. So being a creator alone does give you tougher skin over time, but it it's incomparable to the level of stress of running a company because of the nature of how work. I think typically we're these people who deeply care about our product, and that means we care about how it's affecting each one of those people. So you sort of feel the weight of the expectations of everybody, especially when something's late, when something launches broken and you need to quickly fix it. And it's very easy to get in this headspace where it's a catastrophe. But it isn't a catastrophe. It's a video game and it's a job. And you need to constantly remind yourself of that. And you can fix it and it will be better in the future. So I wanted to sort of preface it with that. But the specific things I do, there's a lot of small things. Eating, right, exercising, and sleeping. This seems obvious, and people have heard it their whole lives, so it seems maybe silly to mention it, but we constantly make these bargains with our kids to forfeit them because we're busy. And that so quickly becomes a net loss, and it puts you in a state where you have a hard time recognizing that it's a net loss, especially when it becomes a habit. So, sure, I will work 14 hours once in a while when I have to. But if I were to make that a habit, it's not long before I'm getting 6 hours of actual productivity or less. And the quality of the work declines, and that means you have to fix it later. So the moment that I catch myself getting in kind of a space, and sometimes you don't notice it, sometimes you'll have a fight with somebody you love before you notice it, and the next day you're thinking, where did that come from? And it's this sort of pent-up emotion and anger. So as soon as I catch myself in that state, I'll just take time to cook a really good breakfast, scrambled eggs with tomatoes and mushrooms and onions. And I could have made a fried egg, but it only took 5 extra minutes, and my work will be better for it. That's the obvious ones. The one that really snuck up on me was the social media aspect of it. And then you start to see this in media lately. People talking about like the long-term effects on being constantly connected on society, the correlation with suicide rates and all this other stuff. And I was really skeptical of that, but now I absolutely believe it because I really felt the pull of it on me at all times. Especially when we hit that switch, my phone never stops. The Discord alone could absorb my attention at least several times every hour of my waking day. And that is a good problem to have, right? That's a good indicator of a healthy community, and people are excited about the game and they want to collaborate. But it has this weird side effect that I'm always thinking about that game. And I can say from my previous game launch, a game that was much less dear to me, that can put you in a really mental place. With the previous project, it got so bad that, and this was because I was struggling with all those things you have to learn, it was less social then. But it got to the point where I actually resented the game itself, and that there couldn't be a worse creative place to be in. So you absolutely have to learn how to shut off and shut it off before you get obsessed or overwhelmed, or it becomes in your dreams when you're trying to sleep. I've had bug fixing dreams, and this got bad enough that I decided to do something about it. So this tiny thing ended up being such a massive improvement to my life, was simply setting a phone to certain hours that it can't disturb me. My phone has this do not disturb setting. And it seems silly, but that was like night and day. Now, even if it's only after 10 p.m., I know that I have several hours before sleep where I can not worry about anything that's been huge. So shutting off and walking away.
I 100% hear that.
Awesome.
I
it's so easy to underestimate.
I mean, I'm like a wall for people who like have stuff they need to talk about, and they would call me at the most ridiculous hours, and it's just like, nope, I'm not doing it anymore. You can call during sane hours. I'm not available at this point. I'm asleep. If you absolutely need something, you call, I guess, like my fiance or something, if it's like a super do or die emergency. But please don't text me to be like, I did a bad, and please talk to me because like I stressed out because I lost my glasses at midnight. I swear to God. I got so upset sometimes because it's like I can only imagine that with the Discord and amplified, and then people being like, "Man, I found this bug over here," and also, "Hey, so what's the news on this? What about the roadmap?" And you just being like, "Oh dear God, I feel the need to answer." especially because like
Yeah.
Discord pings at you and like pulses the little flash of light as it goes, and you're just like, I want to get rid of that little one at the corner. Someone's direct
I
pinged
fucking
me.
hate that. I think we need to rethink that from the design ground up. The little one is not good for any of us. It's not healthy.
I mean, I
I want
also
to
hate
know.
it because it goes off on like anything that tags a channel in general. So like, I'll be like, did someone directly ask me? I'm like, nope, it was just a channel flag.
And that's not to say I don't want to be able to. Absolutely do. It's simply the way we have to be. All of us, as whether we're creators or personally managing our own lives, we need to be conscious of how this stuff affects our brains. Because you want to be mentally secure enough to handle an emergency if you have to. I've had an entire platform fail, and I would find out at 2 in the morning, and I want to be able to deal with that with a positive outlook and not have to be this giant catastrophe. The only way you pull it off is to, and that means taking care of yourself the rest of the time. Or if your friend calls you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of self care, which I am not the best at. But we've had podcasts about that, folks. But um, I think that more or less touches most of the I guess the peripheral stuff. More about you, more about the background. So I guess we'll talk about Nova Drift itself now, or at least go a bit more in depth on it. It's definitely we've talked about its take on sort of the space shooter genre, and I was wondering if you feel like we've missed anything on the description of the game, or if at this point, between like video and also everything we said, if you think there's been at least a somewhat decent summary of it.
Oh yeah, totally. And I think the game was. I like the way I like to work. Is something speaks for itself anyway. Um, yeah, no, I'm very happy with it.
Okay.
I guess I'd like people to know that there's a huge amount coming. We have an entire year of content on the roadmap. Each one is a fairly major update. Some of those things. Every content pack has new weapons, shields, and gear, more power ups, more super mods. There's particularly exciting new modes coming. Wild Metamorphosis, which we've talked about before. Dimensional Rifts, which are a lot like you've seen in other games like Diablo, Anthem. Basically, a player opts into a particularly dangerous area at the benefit of greater rewards, and the monsters will have some horrible mod that will make them that much more dangerous to
Bullets
compensate.
times
Um,
two, whatever.
mhm.
God help
Yeah,
me.
fun global modifiers like that. God help you. Challenge mode draft is coming. So some people have requested and draft in the sort of card game terminology, where you would create your build ahead of time and immediately be thrust into a high late game area, and then you could fight uber bosses or all this content, stuff like that. We've got a bestiary coming. We have the full campaign slated for the end of the year, including the final boss and introduction and ending. So that'll be the story mode of the game. And the final major update that's planned, and again, we always create many smaller updates along the way that aren't
You've mentioned there's
explicitly
the
stated.
unplanned side updates that
Yeah,
just sneak their
which
way in.
is absolutely my favorite part of development. It's the stuff that is born of inspiration. Um, Gear mutations. So these are sort of side grades for the current weapon, armor, and body sets that you have. So, for instance, you have the Vortex weapon now, which is this roiling tempest you charge up and release, and it sucks enemies into you. So there may be a version of that that becomes a sort of whirlpool around you that's location. So these side grades that let you completely transform the gear into something new allows us to get a lot more build variety without creating entirely new gear from the ground up.
I just want a black hole generator. That's all. I don't care if it'll maybe kill
That's
me.
I think that is exactly what the other mutation for Vortex should be.
Oh heck yes. I'm 100% on
Generate black
board.
holes.
I mean, I'm
Yeah, you're
also
not
a
the only one who's
hundred.
requested that. That's a popular request.
I'm also 100% probably going to die to my own black hole that I fired out into something point blank. But like, heck yeah,
Those are my favorite mods to make, are things that can kill you.
I'm guilty of I enjoy things like that in games a little bit too much. It's just
Oh
funny
yeah.
to get good at using though. It's like, oh, you use this sword that gets better when you're at low health. So you're like, I'm just gonna be at low health all the time.
It's like I'm bribing you to kill yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think it's really good for the game because it gives players who are very familiar with the game something to challenge themselves with and benefit from without hurting the game for beginners who, if they're intimidated by it, simply don't have to take that option. I'm fond of that mechanic.
Plus, it looks cool.
It looks cool.
You're gonna die, but it'll look cool. Um, but yeah, we've already talked, I guess, a little bit about how Nova Drift came to be and some of the design philosophy behind it. At this juncture, though, is there anything else that you feel we may have omitted in our earlier conversations, either about the design philosophy that you've settled on for the game in its current state, or just even sort of the origins of the game itself and the genre you chose? Since you mentioned like a lot of your things were the build customization, everything, but they're for a very different genre of game. They're action RPGs as opposed to space shooter.
That was a very deliberate choice. It's a good question. There's a few reasons, and one of them is that I feel like I absolutely love the arcade era of gaming, if that's not obvious. And I feel like there's a huge amount that we forgot about because we're distracted by it. Naturally, we're always excited about the new. And I remember back to the time when 3D gaming was just getting huge. And we did see some amazing games like Mario 64.
Star Fox
But
64.
oh
Cough.
yeah, but we also had a vast amount of game companies suddenly start acting like they lost all their sensibilities on how a game should be structured and designed. Right? We had this almost dark era of gaming because everything had to be 3D, and so instead of conceptualizing normal inspirations and constraints, we had this additional weird element. We're like, all right, so we're doing a 3D game. How can we make that work? And the result was a huge amount of homogeneity of innovation. It almost became unacceptable to continue releasing 2D games. And it wasn't until that kind of calmed down and 3D was established as standard that it started to be seen as what it was. It wasn't a mandate, it was now a medium that you had the choice of working within. So I think like we then forgot about all these great 2D mechanics we can play with. We haven't explored everything we can do with the thing that made arcade era games fun. So I wanted to make an asteroids like. And it is the perfect medium to build the deepest system you can because the production value is low. That's not to conflate that with easy. It's definitely not. It's often harder to do simple than it is to do complex. But I can quickly create art and I can quickly iterate and I can very quickly turn out features. And that's something that would not have been true for one person who is the artist, designer, uh, programmer for another team. If this was a 3D game or if it had been a platformer, all of the environmental asset costs would have been getting in the way of that. So it was basically the marriage of I want to make something cool and retro with I want to make the thing that will be a platform for constant growth and improvement. I can always just drop new content on top of it, which is quickly becoming my favorite game model, like the Path of Exile. Every 3 months we update and it's new and exciting, and you reinvent the meta and get new people. I love that. It's so creative and collaborative, and it really keeps developers accountable.
So you've already sort of talked about this a bit for at least in effect on it, but was there anything that specifically influenced the art style you use for Nova Drift?
Really old arcade cabinets. It's sort of like a natural evolution of that. If you look back to, I I forget the name of the technology that asteroids used, where it wasn't pixels, it was somehow drawing these lines. They end up looking like
Scan
laser
line?
like.
No.
I
God.
don't know, but
I know what you're
it had a
talking
unique
about.
aesthetic, and you saw it in other games like Side Scroller. I think was one of them. Obviously, everybody brings up Geometry Wars, which is also referencing that era. And it seemed to be the bold, glowing shapes, like Tron-like aesthetic, seems to be the perfect compromise between modern and retro. It looks new and sharp, but it still is clearly an homage to its roots. And I like that. And it's quick to make. So it's simply exactly what I needed.
Now, we've talked about this a lot. You are still in the process of releasing this game. So, I mean, it's early access. It's not done being made. Challenges are still coming. But what's been the hardest process for you as so far with Nova Drift on, I suppose, the mechanics aspects? And you sort of talked about the background part of like keeping on top of things.
Balance. Balance is incredibly hard. Not harder than the mental health aspects we talked about, but in terms of actually developing the game, balance. Everything you add to the game is technically power creep, a term most people in the game have probably heard of, but it's not in a way you'd expect. It's simply that whenever the player has an additional choice to make, they're inadvertently given more power. So not only do the enemies have to be always moving with the power of the new skills, but you have to deal with the rippling effect that every skill has that you add on every other skill that exists in the game. And a game with hundreds of thousands of combinations of possibilities doesn't mean much if there's only a few dominant metas. So you are always agilely retrofitting the game to be as good as it can be. And that adds a kind of exponential amount of work because you expect, okay, well, I'm adding 5 new features. But like I said, that ripples. So you're really affecting every mod you've ever made in some small way. And players always surprise you. They always come up with combos you didn't imagine, which is one of my favorite aspects of watching the game grow. Is I love that works, that emergently has been created. There's a couple popular builds that I never intended to be in the game, which is exactly my aspiration for the game was.
Wasn't it ship ramming was one of them?
Oh, ship ramming came really early, but you're right in that I didn't tend to have in the game. That was watching my wife play. It was kind of erratically crashing things. And she was like, well, that works. And I was watching her and how much fun she was having. And I was like, why can't that be this game's melee? Like, how far can we push that? So we created a ship exactly for that, and now there's 2 as of the update at the end of this month. And there's entire strategies built around becoming a comet, directly ramming into things, or burning things with a thruster, or burning enemies who are near you, based on all these other kinetic motions you can do.
One of the stealth ships has the thing that like helps burn people, and then there's the hull breaker, right?
Mm-hmm. And now we have the Vipers coming at the end.
What's their little gimmick?
The Viper is a burn-based ship focusing on kind of caustic poison.
Oh, lovely.
So their thing, they have a few. It has this caustic barrier which builds up over time, or when you take damage to your hull. And the ship, unlike the hull breaker, which will very high velocity when it crashes, you just need to contact enemies with this barrier, and it stings them with this incredibly long-lasting burn. So he's very much a boss killer. On top of it, it has this sort of defensive attack where every time it takes direct hull damage, it spews out this caustic venom strike at them. And you can build this the obvious way, which is,
tanky
trading
attack.
your shield in for more health. Yeah, and crashing into stuff and burn. Or there's the other clever ways that Nova Drift has to self-damage yourself and trigger that ability. So you can effectively create a rapid fire venom gun out of this body ability, which is what No Drift is all about, is creating your own attacks and
Yeah, because isn't
strategies.
there like a weapon that as you hold it down, it just starts doing hull damage to yourself?
Yeah, there's quite a few. One of them is that every time you fire, your fire rate increases, and it greatly reduces your mobility, but the fire rate ramps up to this kind of incredible level. And every time you do so, you're taking ramping hull damage. So it's like this stationary machine gun turret that you become. And so with this body, you could harness that venom strike ability to convert it into a rapid fire venom turret in a way. And this is core to my hope for Nova Drift, is that these possibilities will become so numerous that people are constantly inventing new configurations that no one's seen before.
And you're working on also side grades for all these ships and weapons and shields,
Yeah,
so
so
it's
that
going to get
multiplies the
even
possibilities.
more
Yeah, I'm
crazy.
excited about that.
Um,
That's what keeps me going.
so like a really big thing is you were communicating a lot with your community, be it Twitter, Discord, etc., like the Steam forums. And in fact, you've recently, well, semi-recently, been worked on a content release that was inspired by community suggestions. Just how
Mhm.
integral has their feedback been in shaping Nova Drift, and how much has your vision of the game changed from what you initially saw to what it is now?
It's been huge. It would be so hard to say how much it because it's been so long since it wasn't present. And I'm glad you asked, because earlier when I was that Discord was potentially a great source of stress, it's also been my greatest inspiration. Back maybe 4 years ago, no, 3 years, I was approaching burnout in the early stage of the project, and I didn't have Discord. Then we launched the Kickstarter for the audio track, and the Discord was started, and all of a sudden there was an immense amount of energy I was getting from it. It was really galvanizing. There was all these people who would share this experience with me and give me immediate feedback and share their ideas. And suddenly I was more invested than I'd ever been. So it's this interesting thing that is both, this amazing inspiration that can also consume you. um, I don't know that it has in its core design changed, but most of my best ideas were made with the collaboration of the community, I think. And it is vastly a better game, especially because with so many people playing, you get to take the skills you have. Like, I've never been strong. I program, learning it, but I was an artist for the bulk of my career. So having access to people who can actually get me to the point of what I know I want the skill to do in the most efficient mathematical way. Or other people who have simply been playing roguelikes their entire life with a really strong sense of balance, and they often have insight into why something isn't used. Like if you have an underpowered skill, it isn't so much that the solution is always just buff that skill, right? It could be a result of every other skill that is causing it to not be a needed niche, or there's simply a better choice. So people have been really useful in breaking things down, and as a result, allowing me to develop that much faster because we're constantly discussing and solving suggestions. It's just like a meta mind. It makes everything better.
Fair.
And a lot of my favorite Superman community as well. In fact, I think one of the most popular ones right now, Saturation Fire, which is that spool out chain gun effect, but it also reduces weapons threat. So you can take a weapon that is normally used as area clear and laser focus into have that control behind your character at the cost of
At the
mobility.
cost of what?
Stuff like that. And losing mobility,
Hmm.
right? You're stationary. Um, so yeah, they've been a huge boon to the diversity, which is other.
I mean, there's been a lot of builds designs that have existed and that are cropping up day by day, but is there any like favorites that you have that are like both past and current?
Totally. Um, I would have to say my favorite right now is the Architect, which is a ship body. Uh, in essence, makes your constructs, your robots, your drones, really good at the cost of limiting you to having. And my favorite permutation of this is taking it with the mines, with the mod loaded mines, which makes the mine fire your weapon. So then you could build any weapon shell. Um, my favorite is to use it with the railgun ability. So the result is this super powered bomb you're dropping that creates a radial spread, this highly penetrating gun in every direction. And this becomes your only attack. Um, it's very tactical and a lot of fun because of the sheer power behind it, and the positioning is just joyous.
As I
And there's this other
recall,
option.
sorry, just to interject. As I recall, though,
No,
it can't actually shoot out uh the droid weapon, though. Correct? Like you
right,
can't drop
the
them.
construct, the caveat that it isn't allowed to be used employed by other drones. But I actually think we're going to change that. Just by popular request, I want as things to work with as possible. If I encounter a situation like, well, that's hard because usually come at it from to work with that, find a way.
Because I think
Um,
I got the thing that allows a ship to fire your own weapon, and then I grabbed the droid. I like summon ship, get the droid weapon
yeah,
because I empower droid weapons. So I was like, and then it'll be empowered and it'll
nice.
fire. And then I'm like, oh wait,
Yeah,
it
I see
won't.
no reason that we can't have minds that counts.
Uh,
Convert your weapon into constructs. We need every possible combination. This is why the game will never be finished.
I mean, it's fine. It's fine. It'll keep things interesting. But yeah, you
Yeah,
were
it is that.
mentioning other designs.
I also really like the what people call the comet build. You do everything you can to convert your whole rig into a high speed comet that just smashes directly through it. And then you combine it with the dying star ability, which causes you to take constant burn damage with the benefit of burning everything on the screen based on how close to it you are. So you're this smoldering, high velocity implement that doesn't even fire a weapon,
How do
and it's
you
absolutely viable.
how do you get health back from that?
You have to buy an incredible amount of buffs, but the Hullbreaker's main advantage is very good regeneration. So
Ah.
with the help of armor stacks and channeling, there's another ability that recovers health based on how many enemies are burning. And this build is extremely good at igniting
Burning
everything.
everything.
So it's absolutely calamitous, destructive, and it's a joy to play. Highly recommend Hullbreaker, Celestial Lance, Dying Star if you haven't.
I need to try this because it sounds ridiculous.
Awesome.
So, I mean, we've talked a lot about like player ship design, but there's like a lot of bosses you encounter. I mean, there's also the elites who are complete dickholes to contend with sometimes when there's multiple on the screen. But like, what's the boss you enjoy the most design wise and
The Seraph,
mechanically?
the latest one. This has been one of those things. A lot of those bosses are such older designs. I feel like this is this unavoidable aspect of game development. Is as you move forward and you get better at what you do, you raise the bar. So the new bosses have done that, and now I'm feeling I want to redesign the old ones to kind of get to that level. But of course, you need to be careful about following this hole too far. Never get anything new out. But the Seraph was, I think, does a really good job of testing all of your abilities. It does a little of everything, and if you're too slow or you don't have the damage or you're not tough enough, it will definitely let you know. And that, for me, is exactly what a boss should do in a game where you have such myriad build possibilities. Is it will do its best to find you and make sure you're appropriate for the game's environment.
So it's effectively a check. Is your build viable to get past here? Otherwise,
Right.
you're
And
dead as
yeah,
yeah.
and that's approaching the point in the game where we're starting to get close to the target length of a game. Again, I have this goal that games last between 15 and 20 minutes, right, to keep it fresh and iterative, um, to give players that break from the frenetic. So that is a very pure check there. But after that point, we have a lot of work to do. And that's why I'm creating alternate bosses and uber bosses to start encountering after you get to that point. And we make sure that only the truly strongest builds and top players are able to survive much longer than the target.
But when you like hyped up how bad the Seraph is, and I'm just like alternate Seraph, alternate Uber Seraph.
Which, of course, you would encounter at like wave 200, where the game's natural speed man.
Is there going to be any bosses, enemies that are sort of built out of the players' upgrade pools, as horribly calamitous as that could be?
I think there's already a lot of the skills and the aesthetics that maybe hint at a lore aspect that we're not so different from them. As for them using specific skills, yeah, I think that's always. Um, it would be interesting to have one that is
Alternate
literally a
dimension.
mirror of your powers, but the oh man, that would take a long.
Yeah, I'm just
But
thinking
every
like
game's gonna have
alternate
that shadow
dimension,
self.
horrible mirror match when you have the black
Yeah.
hole gun, and you're just like, oh, I regret
Oh shit.
everything.
I hope I do get to do that.
Because, I mean, that's always the thing. If someone builds, like, an overpowered enough ship, and then they end up just fighting themselves, it's like, oh,
Totally.
Always good. Now, you mentioned this earlier when you were talking about the roadmap things, but there is a story mode being included. How long have you been planning out the narrative for the game, and how in-depth is it going to be?
That took a lot of thought, and I feel like to properly have it be an homage to those arcade days, it should be very minimal
A
and
winner is
up to
you?
interpretation. Maybe not that minimal, but in the way that it encouraged so much imagination. Like, okay, here's an interesting thing: Space Invaders. We only have these tiny pixelated photos to imagine what they are, and we all had our different idea in our own heads. And then they did this thing where they introduced the box art and then this alternate box. And suddenly there's this illustration of Space Invaders. That's what that artist's Space Invader looked like. It was totally different than what they looked like. And I think there's something valuable about providing the room for um, the player inserting themselves. And that's one of the reasons I love pixel art so much, is it does such a great job. It's why Final Fantasy 3/6 is often more emotive
Heck
than
yeah.
Final Fantasy 8 or 9, is because we have that room to imagine them. And the other example I think about Arkanoid, it's an absurd concept. You're a paddle, and there's a ball, and you're defeating the Nistra Island. It has a story, and it's complete nonsense. But there's something incredibly charming about it. It's about a paragraph, and it's some of the most entertaining bad Japanese translation I've ever read.
Like, not even
But still,
bowdlerization, just like straight up bad translation.
yeah, I'm not saying we should do that, but in having only the vaguest indication of what's happening, the player's allowed to come to the interpretation. That's the kind of story.
So it's gonna be story light.
It's story like I will know in my head what's, but I'm never going to tell anybody. I will show you things, and you will come to your conclusion about what your motivations are, what you're doing, what happens after. But it won't be without story. It will be an ending.
May I reserve the right to like ask you a year from now, maybe if you want to go and have a lore cast or at least go over people's fan theories?
Oh, that'd be great. I'd love
Yeah, we can just like maybe rate like how accurate is this to your headcanon versus Word of God?
that. Yeah, no, that's great. I made it make you sign something.
Um, we've talked about a few things here, but you've implemented stuff in the game which hasn't been on the official roadmap since there is one posted up online. Is there anything that you're currently aiming to implement that's not on that roadmap?
Yes, I'm actually fairly sure it's not on there. We just redesigned the structure of some of the mod tree, and it includes a whole new mod tree. Um, just rearranging things in such a way that are sensible, restrictive, invention a little better. So one of those abilities is in the movement tree, where emergency systems used to be located. You can now blink forward in time. There's some more options for players who like twitch reaction, and you can of course combine that in unusual ways. Like thanks to the Viper, now you can do this teleport forward direction. I found that to be a lot of fun. Or jump inside of an enemy that has rotating shields. Just these other cool things. So there's always little things like that. But the big thing for me that ends up map is like you had suggested with the later weapon, is add functionality that doesn't currently exist to combos that you wish to. So yeah, it would be cool if you could create this interceptor with integrated weaponry that your blade drone instead of you. But it's a huge job, but it's absolutely worth having. So a lot of stuff like that gets done. Like you didn't used to be able to come first shot with charge shot in a way that was satisfying, and now there is. It actually took quite a lot of time to balance. But now we always have that option, and I think that's really important to keep moving forward with old stuff and not just add new.
So, I'm gonna actually talk a bit about mechanics more, especially since the game's been in the process of evolving. But are there any mechanics or concepts that used to be central, at least fairly important to Nova Drift, that you've had to drop? And if so, do you have any intention of like revisiting them?
I've actually cut quite a lot. There used to be the most memorable one. It's called Intersection, and it was an ability that made collide with your enemies. And because things like the pole existed, this translated to like an area, and it was a nightmare to balance. And ultimately, some things like that you have to just say, this is hurting the meta, it's helping. That kind of. There was a weapon called Vulcan, which was powered by your shields, and as long as you had shields available, it would reduce its spread over time as you fired, like siege mode does. And things like that, I deleted. Well, this to me feels like something the player should more be able to construct out of mods rather than be its own dedicated gear slot, which is ultimately more interesting. But that said, it has pieces I would love to put back in. Like, it would be cool if there was a way to pour your shit. Can't do that. So yeah, totally. Everything cut, I think, has a place somehow. And now that we have wild metamorphosis coming, a lot of those that may have been too impactful in the meta can be added simply because the player can't rely on encountering them every run.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm just like slowly contemplating. So here's a thing that's actually, I mean, it sort of goes on the level of like difficulty coding and everything, though it's less balanced and more. You were originally using Game Maker Studio and transitioned to Game Maker Studio 2.0.
It's true.
What was it like to go from the different engines, and how much of a challenge did it provide?
That was incredibly difficult, and I got very lucky again from the community. There's a user, UltraKen, who very very talented career programmer, was able to help us do that. And things that would have been incredibly large hurdles for me were simply removed, and I was able to focus on keeping the game's content moving forward. So, oh man, it's hard to overstate how important it can be when you're a small team.
Also, for functionality, like how much of a change has it been from going from just GMS to GMS 2.0?
Game Maker is an interesting. Uh, the original, it was such an amazing tool to have. There's nothing else like it. There was nothing else that would let a pure artist immediately dive into. Like that night, you could be following a tutorial. A game that is finished by any reasonable definition, right? It could be a tiny tic-tac-toe game, but it's a game and you made it and it's finished and you never made one before that day. That said, it changed over the years from sort of a hobbyist, from sort of a toy to a hobbyist tool to a serious game development tool. There were serious growing pains. And the leap between Game Maker and Game Maker 2 is so colossal. And it's the difference between like a love-hate relationship and a pure love relationship. It couldn't have happened soon enough. And towards the end of it, where everything kept moving forward, but Game Maker wasn't, there were some times where I was like, this isn't working, I can't do this anymore. I did switch to Game. This is amazing. But they brought together just in time, and they absolutely worked. Now it's, my whole life is so much easier thanks to Game Maker. And it's exactly what you want. Oh, you're going to. Unity's great, but it's much more 3D focused.
So this is definitely sort of tied to a community question, and I suppose also just sort of the background to game creation. But like, what was the hardest part of running the Kickstarter for the game, given that it's a very different sort of beast to game creation?
Luckily, we'd done it before. I've had the benefit of a failed Kickstarter, so I knew the sort of perils that could get into it. Yeah, it's no secret. There's a lot of pitfalls in Kickstarter, and the big one was overpricing. Right, so we were very careful about not offering physical rewards because they just end up taking away so much of your attention. There's a huge amount of time prepping them and shipping them out. When your company is this small, distractions are your worst enemy. And it's very easy to get in this loop where you're constantly trying to catch up with what you promised. So overpromising is big. I made sure that everything was a stretch goal, was something I really wanted to get anyway. Not something like bribing you to have so I can get this thing off the ground. I truly believe Kickstarter should really be something that you could use and you hope to use. But if it's ever something you absolutely need, I feel like it's the wrong choice to begin. And I realize it's not what it was designed to do. But we just see so many instances of Kickstarter doing projects. And it's because people aren't ready to understand what they're getting into until they've done it a few times. So it's really good to have a backup plan before going all in on crowdfunding platform. So a big part of it was having been through that again and making sure that everything it did only benefited what I was already doing. So the Discord again, seeded from the Kickstarter community. That was a huge benefit. And as I've just explained, the result was a lot of work that I would otherwise have to do myself. I now help on, as well as moral support. And all of that is collaboration. So Kickstarter, you definitely want to have a clear presentation, and that's something that's hard for a lot of people too. Is you're displaying your game as if to somebody who knows nothing, and it's very hard to separate your own mental image of your game to what somebody who's never heard of the picture. So we found an enormous benefit from showing it to people just completely random. don't even play video games. Like, hey, here's what I'm making. What do you think? And a large amount of time they would say something I didn't expect, like, I don't really know what it is. And you realize, oh my gosh, like, here's all of my preconceptions, what I've built that are getting in the way of me presenting what I consider to be the artist, which was not. I'm random. I think you get the idea.
So you used like basically blind testing to go and figure out like what most people bumbling onto it were coming away from to sort of adjust your presentation style from that. Right? Was that correct?
And if you do any work on marketing, yes, exactly. You have about 5 seconds to get somebody's attention before they metaphorically change the channel. And that's really good information for trailers, too. Because I see an awful lot of devs put up to 40 seconds of text or logos or cinematic build-up before I actually see any gameplay, which I certainly have clicked off by then. And all of those things are paramount importance on YouTube or Kickstarters and anything where people are quickly.
I'm very guilty of skipping ahead to see if there is any gameplay footage, and then like, okay, there's gameplay footage, I'll back up, because I'll skip ahead sometimes in a video and see there's no gameplay video footage. Nope.
Yeah, that's an instant pass for me. So I guess what I'm getting at is I had an advantage having done it before and having failed. So I encourage anyone doing a Kickstarter to look at film Kickstarters and trying to really understand why. Because there's a huge amount of errors you can spare yourself. That's true of anything. Failing is just valuable.
I mean, it's only a failure if you don't learn anything from it.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's only an abject failure.
Right.
I suppose on a slightly more positive note, though, I generally ask this question, but do you have any particularly fond memories of watching either members of your community or even just going through Nova Drift yourself?
Yes.
Also, embarrassing shame of getting destroyed by your own game counts as a great story to tell.
Oh, I constantly destroy it. But my favorite story is I ran this game development course at the local international school. My wife and I are in Thailand. She teaches, she's vice principal. And I got to do this cool after-school program where I would teach kids to make a game. Some of those kids won copies of Nova. Some of those kids leaked the game. So a few weeks later, I was getting reports that they caught their kid playing Nova Drift during school hours, during their class. And they knew me, so they knew what the game was. And my personal favorite is looking over a student's shoulder who didn't know I was there. That was just like, that was my I've made it moment.
I mean, it's good. When the game's good enough that people are like, I need to share this, it's good.
Yeah, it's addictive. Kids are pirating it among their own little social.
Are there any other details that you'd like to gush about Nova Drift that we somehow haven't, like, basically covered at this juncture?
No, I feel great. You're asking fantastic questions. Appreciate it.
Hooray! Anyone in the audience who's currently watching, if we've missed questions, totally let me know in the comments, because, I mean, I asked prior to the thing, but, like, basically, Jeffrey mentioned he is totally down for popping on a podcast to talk general gaming and other ends, but, if you have specific Nova Drift questions, I can totally pose it to him. Sounds good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
There you go. So, folks, yeah, put your questions in the comments. I'll get to it. I mean, if you also just have generic, random questions that are appropriate, I stress, we can see about answering them. Appropriate, I stress. Other than that, so you've been working on Nova Drift for a while, like 4-ish years? 4?
Yeah, I don't know. If I did make another small game in the middle, so it's kind of more like 5 years stretched out. But yes, I would say 4 years of actual development.
But, so is it the sole project you're working on currently, or do you have any other side projects you may be working on that may get revealed down the line? And are they going to have that similar or design philosophy of like the builds, the permutations, but with a different genre mashed up, or a different design philosophy?
I would like to think I'm always going to be doing the mashup. I mean, it's kind of hard to make some a blend of everything experience, but I do like to focus on it.
More chimeric games by nature.
Yeah, indeed. I was, for a while, very dead set on an Overture sequel because I do believe I have a way, a weapon building system that I've never seen before, and I'd love to try and create it. But on the other hand, I think it would be a mistake to say now that I am willing to commit my brain to another 4 years. Or, let's be honest, projects tend to grow, not shrink. 6 years of thinking very deeply about one kind. So I'm a bit hesitant to say for sure that I won't want to completely try a different genre, do a fantasy instead of a sci-fi, something like that. So it's very up in the air. But what I do is um, keep notes in my iPhone of just one sentence game pitches, and always have a big collection of them. And lately, I've been thinking a lot about it. It would be fun to do a tactical, very small grid party versus party, almost gotcha, not gotcha kind of game where there's a huge amount of heroes, but
Huh.
mechanics. It's very hard to describe, but I think that's why it appeals to me. So I typically try to make
Like when you're talking
something
like
for it.
tactical grid based, is it sort of like Into the Breach, but instead of like randomized creatures, it'd be like another set of like a squad that you're contending with and trying to overcome?
Squad versus squad. So if you can imagine uh, a hexagon, a set of hexagons, the same shape as Nodra's hexagon, and
Mm-hmm.
there's seven, versus another seven, and each slot holds a character who takes up one or more of them. And there's tactical movement and interaction and combo triggering. Very much about the heroes. Of course, um, I wouldn't use any gotcha mechanics. Simply,
Low key, when you said
you know.
like tactical and hero based, I was just like, Disgaea? Disgaea?
Oh,
Sorry.
I should play that because I've been hearing a lot. Actually played it, but it might be more like what I'm thinking of.
I'm trying to
Sure.
think of what Disgaea would be. I mean, fuck. Whenever I think Disgaea, I immediately compare it to another game by like the same people. So like La Pucelle Tactics,
Mm.
Phantom Brave. Although Phantom Brave is very, very different. But I mean, I guess like Fire Emblem, but Fire Emblem's way more
Mm.
unforgiving.
So that crossed with a versus Into the Breach isn't a huge difference. I also think it's interesting because it's been ages since I've been able to do any real animation.
That'd be
Something I quite enjoy. So it'd be nice to do that again.
yeah. I mean, and that also sounds a lot better than like the immediate first thing I thought of for one line gaming pitch. Because I mean, there's one thing that I'm like, man, I wish I could do it. But then like the immediate Mimi answer I had was the Dark Souls of dating sims.
What? That sounds great. I love it.
I mean, it's what you throw at like a CEO, and then you, I guess, pull a mighty number nine and spend all the money before you actually make the game.
Oh yeah,
I'm sorry, mighty
you
number
should do that.
nine. Rest in
My,
peace. Is
yeah, that got me too.
I didn't. I did not play it. I was thankfully spared. My friend bit the bullet on that one.
Mm.
Hmm.
But real talk, I like your game pitch.
Thanks, thanks. I mean, my actual game pitch, which I will totally talk to you off camera about. I wish is better. I'm trying to think of like how the Dark Souls of dating sims would work like,
It
and
doesn't matter. I'm already sold.
I mean, it's just it's waifu souls, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Oh God, please stop
Sold.
me now. I mean, waifu souls does sound friendlier than blood waifus, though. Though, I mean, I guess that'd be
Yep,
like a great Victorian vampire dating sim
that is the one way you could pull it off.
with like Eldritch Abominations as like the people running their all vampire we'll say all vampire college. No, it'd be a university because they're like all ageless.
This has to be an anime.
I mean, if it's not an anime, someone's gonna probably steal it. Or just anyways, I'm gonna stop rambling because I think this is the part where I've hit the moment of the night because it's like 3:42 a.m. for me.
Yikes.
Where I'm like in genius mode, but it's like galaxy brain genius mode, which is not good.
Too far.
So, is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience at this point?
No, I think we're good.
And I generally ask this question. I mean, we've done a fair bit of this of just plugging indie projects, but are there any indie projects that you're aware of that you've had your eye on or would like to give a shout out to? Or I guess order me to like interview the dev.
Okay. Again, I'm not so up on what's coming up, but okay. Here's three I'd like to highlight. Hades is in early access and looking amazing. I don't think it's that indie, but
I mean, I
it's
would
a
count
good.
them.
Oh yeah.
Bastion and Transistor were indie as fuck. I mean,
Check that out. It absolutely, yeah, they were. It absolutely sells itself. I'm not. They're talking about. You just need to watch a trailer and it'll be immediately know you want. Nimbatus, I think for people who like Nova Drift, worth a look. It's like a drone building game, so very construction oriented. You're assembling pieces of your ship,
I
physically
saw
assembling,
this.
less about. So you can create bizarre drilling automated apparatus you want. And, you flare out.
And like drill
Yeah.
through a fucking planet and then build more drones out of drilling through
Yeah.
this planet. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Never seen anything like it. It's super cool.
it looked very weirdly interesting. I wasn't sure if it'd be my cup of tea, but I think like even on just the way that the different ship customizations and the way you like sort of interacted with the planets in general and just sort of like blazed ahead was very neat to me.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, you said there was a third though?
This one, very few people have heard about. XO One, and I know this one because the creator and I were both creating our Kickstarters in tandem, and we were helping each other. What he's doing is really unique. It's a very beautiful, deeply atmospheric game where you pilot this disc or orb shaped alien spacecraft across this vast alien wasteland, or not wasteland, environment on all these different planets. And it's very meditative and calming. I think it's going to be something special. And nobody knows about it. So get the word out. XO1.
I'm actually trying, like, what's the spelling on it? Because I'm also, like, low-key trying to type it in on Google and be like, peaks?
EXO-1, like ON. It's been really fun to watch this one go through development as he creates the different technologies to generate the planets and the lighting aspect.
Oh, yeah, EXO0NE. That is pretty.
Oh, it is.
Seems like
Yeah,
sort
that's
of
that.
contemplative.
It really is.
Huh.
Which is what I need sometimes.
I mean, that's why I played Journey. And then I played Absu and was horribly disappointed.
Journey's a good example.
Journey was great. Absu, I got really pissed off at being a penguin walking simulator in some sections.
Not familiar with that one.
It's like a spiritual successor to Journey, but I didn't like it as much. I'll leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, to those folks currently watching, you can buy/wishlist Nova Drift on Steam. For news, there's a Twitter, a Facebook, and their website, which you can find links to all of the above in this video's description. Is there anywhere else you'd care to send people?
No, that's great. Thanks so much.
Ah, no, seriously. Thank you for, like, popping on the show. Also, like, seriously, I appreciate you taking the time to pop up in here and schedule things, especially since we're in, like, different time zones.
It's been a lot of fun.
And also a big thanks to my community, both for tuning in, supporting me, and continuing to do these videos, and also to anyone who's from the Nova Drift community. thank you for I guess listening to me and not being like, oh my god, shut the fuck up, guy.
Thanks, guys.
I'm just gonna just self-deprecate myself through the ground, I guess. Anyways, let me know what you guys thought about in the comments, and if you're new here and interested in more indie developer interviews, game reviews, or also tabletop gaming, because we're releasing one every Monday, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you get notified when we have a new release. There's also a Discord, not the Nova Drift Discord. I mean, there's a Nova Drift Discord, and there's also going to be a link inside the description if you're not part of it, but there's also a Discord for the Crit Hit community, which you can check out by clicking the link in the banner or the description. It's pretty cozy there. We always like new people. Lastly, if you'd like to help support the channel, we do have a coffee running to help supplement funds for our lovely editors, and also to make sure we can continue to provide quality content and not starve in the interim. Again, description, banner for dem links. So yeah, that about sums everything up. Seriously, I can't actually thank you enough for popping on this. It was actually really cool to talk to you about the odds and ends of gaming.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
I honestly hope we can do this again at some point. Just to also talk just general gaming stuff, since there was some really neat pre-interview jawing we did that I am really sorry I didn't record, guys.
It's good stuff.
Yeah. I will catch you folks next time. In the meantime, I hope you folks have a good evening, afternoon, or morning whenever you get this. And yeah, see ya.
Farewell.